Thanks for being here. I have been thinking about making a joke of Forum and the Gloman, and I'm guessing nobody in this room other than me gets that, so catch me later. Glad you're here. Thanks for coming out despite the darkness. I will forego most of my introductory comments, which seem sort of superfluous, but I do want to mention one upcoming activity for Urban Chat. We're going to be doing a book club reading of the Strong Towns book, Escaping the Housing Trap, Strong Towns Response to the Housing Crisis. A lot of us are somewhat familiar with it already, but I think there's so many good lessons. We are going to do a more detailed read. If you're interested in being on that mailing list, I'll let everybody know about it. But if you want to particularly be on the mailing list, catch me afterwards. First meeting will likely be sometime in early August. So probably doing 3 meetings. With that, Brian O. came here before he realized the power was out. I don't know what he would have done if he'd already known that. But he, in a spirit of good nature, is willing to talk to us in the semi-darkness. And we'll just see how it goes. Brian is the Community Development Director. He is part of the effort to formalize Parklet rules, and he can tell you some history. But, can I show you one fact?
Please.
The first reference to Parklet was William Thackeray in a personal letter in 1854. At your request, I looked it up. There you go.
All right. Does anyone else kind of love this? Just
Relax. Nice atmosphere.
yes. Thanks everyone for spending your time with us this evening. As Dave said, my name is Brian O. I am your Community Development Director for the City of Petaluma. About a year and a half into the job. 4-year resident here, just long-time visitor. And so I feel very blessed to be able to work with our community on all things community development, and it's, you know, it goes beyond just development and housing and general plan. I mean, it's really about the conversations like we're going to have tonight. I'm not sure exactly the format we'll have just without the Zoom and the PowerPoint, so bear with us. I'm very reachable for any follow-up questions, but I'm grateful for the time just to talk to you all about Parklets. And I think in general I'm going to kind of talk about it more in the concept of community public space. It's about 4 o'clock this afternoon. I was wrapping up meetings at City Hall. My wife had the kids. They were getting some ice cream down at Angela's, and so I took that opportunity just to walk down there and spend about 30 minutes with the family before heading back up this way and walking through downtown. And that's really what Parklets are about. As Dave mentioned, there's sort of an origin story to it. The concept really is behind people wanting to reclaim public space again. And so what that looks like in the form of a parklet, so parklet, sort of mini parklet for short, is the repurposing of public space, typically a parking space, 2 parking spaces. I think we probably may have a few more parking spaces. But repurposing public space for public use. And so, again, that's one way. I have about 12 years of experience, starting with the city of Los Angeles, spending a little bit of time in San Mateo, and then here with you all. And the common theme has been about just this, how do we make sure that we're working with the community on some of the great ideas. And so fortunately and unfortunately, we were presented with this opportunity like many other cities at the start of the pandemic. And so this was largely what you see now up and down the region was a response to the pandemic. So how do we make sure that we are able to support our local businesses when indoor wasn't an option? So a lot of our restaurants, I think actually up to, this is where the PowerPoint would have been helpful.
We can
at its heyday, no, we're good. 58 total businesses in town that at the peak of the pandemic, with all the different rules that were changing, the city was able to support. And so what we typically see now are retail, sort of restaurant uses, but everything from yoga studio to even hairdresser. I even remember a story about a barber cut hair in his garage during the pandemic. I mean, we're not that far removed from that time. That said, we're here in 2024. We're down to essentially 12, 13 parklets around town, mostly focused in downtown. And they all sort of have their own flavor to it. Because at the time, I mean, the objective was, let's save businesses and let's try to get through this process in a temporary fashion. And so fast forward, June of 2024, last month, the city staff had the opportunity to facilitate a workshop with City Council on what, we ran a survey with the community just to get a sense of how people are using the spaces, how people want us to use the spaces, and then help form some sort of pilot program. And so what we're looking at right now as the city is a 3-year pilot program ready to launch as late as the spring. So typically, a lot of places, I know Dave was in the Midwest, there's a seasonal component to this, right? So oftentimes we'll see a little bit more activity, a little bit more interest during the spring, summertime, and then with the wet weather that we're blessed with here, not as much use, and so you see a lot of the tents sort of not used as much. I think the primary takeaway from the workshop with our council, with the public that had the opportunity to provide comment that evening, and throughout the survey process, so we had a survey process up for about 50 days prior to the workshop, was they want more, the community wants more of this. How do we utilize parking spaces strategically throughout, primarily downtown, for use for the community, and not just a solely privatized space, right? So that's typically, I think you see a few of them where they are used sort of quasi-public, private, but for the most part, it's relatively a private sort of outdoor dining space, which is not necessarily the wrong approach, but I think the takeaway is they can be so much more. And so wanting to make sure there's a public component to it. I'll just spend maybe the next couple minutes, just a little bit of interactive exercise here on just if anyone's willing to share how they experience spending their time downtown. I think that's always pretty telling. I'll just go first while people start to think about this. We like to build in date nights, my wife and I, and it's typically what we'll take a deep breath and we sort of have to budget a night out in town it costs money, right? For many families, it's something that we have to be mindful of, we have to budget. There is a business, and absolutely should be a business component to having a thriving city, a thriving downtown. I scratch my head to think about the times where we've come downtown and not spent any money. Again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but when I think about the different public spaces, we have a gem of a public space, which is the City Hall lawn that is just on the outskirts of downtown. It's where I coach my kids with their soccer program, and it's a wonderful asset. But for the most part, if you're downtown, outside of Putnam Plaza, outside of some of the sidewalk dining, maybe the chess table if you've had an opportunity there along the waterfront, there aren't many places. And so part of this is, there is an equity component to this, is to make sure that how do we make sure people feel included, the entire community, and they feel like they see themselves as part of people that can enjoy downtown. So I'll just pause there. Just would love to just get a gauge, a sense of how people experience downtown themselves. Dan.
Well, I have an office downtown that I'm in 3 days a week with a couple of coworkers. And one of the reasons we really enjoy the Parklets is they give us a lot of options for where to go with the dog for lunch. But just in general on downtown, we often wander around and find ourselves looking for more third space kind of places to run into people, you know, that out in front of Riverfront Cafe on Friday night is always a cool happening social scene, but it'd be nice to see that in more places.
Yeah, totally. Any other experiences, maybe from a business owner? Okay, well, I think we all hold downtown near and dear to all of our hearts. It's something that it's the first place that we bring people from out of town. It's the place that we find ourselves in a third place, and we just need more of it. And I think it adds to the economic vitality. It adds to the community space and the community vibrancy that I think we're all seeking, and one of the big priorities that's coming out of our council year after year. And so we aren't recreating a wheel here. And I'll sort of just walk through a little bit of our process moving forward. But I will just pause. I mean, there was a little discussion about history. Someone was asking me about how this started, and I think one piece that gets lost is this. So how it started was parking day here in the States. I remember as an undergrad, not knowing anything about active transportation. I mean, I always knew I liked riding a bike, and I wanted to walk places and just didn't want to be in the car. I grew up in Los Angeles, and it was just part of my life. But every chance I got, I was fortunate to live beachside and just get on the beach cruiser and just experience the world a little bit differently. Right? When you walk down the boulevard here versus drive, that's a whole different experience. You start to see all the storefronts. There's this super cool little retail shop that opened up right next to the Hideaway, just a tiny little hole in the wall. They're selling some apparel gear. Never would have thought twice to think that there was a little retail spot there, but you experience that by walking and experiencing our community with your feet, right? And so that's really the objective here. How do we make it more interesting? How do we create more spaces so that our entire community is able to feel included, is able to feel like they're a part of, they see themselves as part of downtown. And I think there's always a balance, right? Parking always comes up. The city's currently going through a parking study. How much parking does one city truly need? We're just rolling out our fare-free transit as a pilot, and so when I think the big buzzword in the development community is this concept around 15-minute cities. How do we become a 15-minute city where you can do most of your daily activity within a 15-minute radius, whether it's through bike, through walking, or through bus. And we're incredibly fortunate to have our own bus system, and that to me is going to be the game changer. I mean, we are not a big city by any means. Roughly 3 miles from one end to the other. It can be done. Councilman, I'm sure, if you were biking from your home, that's Lynch Creek Trail, that's our crosstown connector. And so as we're starting to evolve and feel like we can actually, experience our city, our community, our local retail, and not be so dependent on our automobiles, that's just going to add to more of the vibrancy. And so with that said, we're still, wanting to balance this question of how many parking spots we have. And so we're going through a study right now through some money from the state to help answer that question, provide that balance, as we start to think about different uses with our parking spaces. And so it's an exciting time. We have a number of existing parklet owners downtown, most of them, usually the store frontage, the restaurants. And so, we'll come up with a program on, how to sort of evolve them into that 2.0 to make sure that there is a public component to it. I mean, that was another thing that was really clear, was how do we make sure that the investment that we're doing, the changes that we're doing downtown, can be accessed by all and not just a patron of a restaurant. And so that's something we're working on. Through the end of this year, we're trying to come up with a concept that what we heard with council was make it easy for the applicant, but don't make it easy, but don't make it so formalized and so standardized that everything looks the same, right? Put that Petaluma flair to it, have a little bit of sort of creative license for those that want to work with the city in this program. And so that's a hard balance to strike, but it's something we're looking forward to as a city government to help provide our community, our neighbors, you all. So with that, I'll pause. Any questions, or doesn't even have to be about Parklets. I was just telling Dan, the last slide I had in the PowerPoint was this great photo. It's right in front of McNear's, looking north during Ciclavia, and so this was back in 2022. We closed down the street, the boulevard, for a few hours on a Sunday, and people got to experience their downtown in a pretty unique way. And when I think about it, the program, I don't know who came up with the tagline, but free range, that was our Parklet program. And so of course, there's always a nod to the chicken. But it's free range is all of that, right? It's the parklets, it's open streets, it's the incredible bike ride that happens every Friday through town. It's these different ways that we experience our city, our merchants, our community, and that's what's going to add to the vibrancy. I mean, that's what makes me excited. That's what keeps me coming into City Hall every day. So with that, I'll take any questions, comments. Councilman.
Yeah, I don't know, a few days, maybe a couple of weeks ago, I suddenly got concerned about the difference between Pocket Park and a parklet, and I was wondering if you have to have, any piece of property has to be one or the other. Seems like especially some of the LA ones are both.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I worked on the Los Angeles program, and it was sort of this menu, right? So you could have a parklet, you could have a plaza, which is typically a larger space. Like I think about every time I walk by McNear's, I mean, you sort of have that triangle. You have a triangle park there, and wouldn't it be great if there was a little bit more of activation, a little bit more of a community use instead of just the giant redwood trees. And so I think I wouldn't even distinguish between a pocket park and a parklet. I think at the end of the day, it's you're utilizing public space that we all should be having access to, and I've seen some where they have some sort of recreation, maybe like an exercise station, and so I would think maybe something like that could be considered a pocket park, but I don't, there isn't like a true definition of that.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because the places that I refer to as pocket parks in Petaluma, like the end of 8th Street where the bathtubs are going to go, or like the little thing in front of the Hampton Inn.
Yeah.
You know, they sort of seem more than a place for a community to gather as maybe a place to to remove yourself from the community a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Nicole?
I have a few questions, but I don't want to take up too much airtime. My first question is, with regards to the number of permits for these free-range parklets that are, is that determined on the study, the parking study that you're doing?
Great question. I wouldn't necessarily, so this question about density came up. How many so irrespective of the number of parking spaces we have, and I think different cities take a different approach. So Healdsburg just came down and said we have X number of parking spaces downtown. We're going to do we won't have more than 5% of those spaces be repurposed as a parklet. I think we'll want to have somewhat of an informed decision based on a lot of different factors. Some of it's going to be input from the merchants, from our downtown association. I think there's a lot of good ideas already on where there could be a successful set of parklets. And again, we're not recreating the wheel. I have on my desk, it's literally a plan sitting on a shelf. It's the 1986 plan for our downtown sort of river walk, they call it. And so that's everything along Water Street, and then even creating these linear parks throughout our downtown. And so there's this big sort of master plan to pedestrianize and make it more inviting for people. And so that wasn't I don't think it was a consideration that came up at the time. There was a mention that the fact that there is a parking study happening. And again, I think it may help inform, but at this point, it's a 3-year pilot, and it was, really clear that we wanted to reduce as much of the barriers as we can for people that may be interested. And so, the discussion around like capping or limitations hasn't come up yet.
Yeah, you came up with a comment that, yeah, some ideas have been generated, because most of the surviving ones are almost all restaurants, taking the space in front, which is like, same thing in France, even in Paris, or other places, it's usually the restaurants. And other ideas is part of actually just open space things, or even exercise places that could be done. What have been the best ideas? Has anybody proposed a spot, a use already what's our best ideas so far? Because we've put it out there, it's been several months, and lots of surveys got on. Practically, what has been offered as, oh, I have this great idea, and it's actually survivable and fundable? So what do we have right now in front of us?
Yeah, so there's been, I think the most energy is around Water Street, really. And there wasn't sort of any prodding about that, but I think naturally, just as a river town, and again, that's the place we meet. I mean, even when I recruit new city employees, and that's what we do. We start from City Hall, and we walk straight down Western, and if I can't get them on board by the time we get to the river, that's something for me to work on, but that's usually like my thing. I get down to the river, and that's sort of where you can close, right? Because that's the space, that's the thing that draws us. For too long, we've sort of turned our backs to the river, right? You see it on the Golden Eagle Shopping Center. There was sort of this bigger plan to sort of turn that around and make it facing the river, but you're starting to see that a little bit more activation happening with respect to Brewster's, the apartments, and then so on and so forth down Lynch Creek. And so we hear a lot about Water Street. We hear on both segments, so the Brewster side, the downtown side, and then Kentucky comes up a lot, right? So oftentimes and that's really when we think about our fairs and our parades, and that's sort of the heartbeat, right? That's what we close down, and that's how we have community, and so that's another example and a place that the community seems to resonate with.
I'll just add to that there's new businesses now on Water Street, so when I opened Estuary, I opened the back of it and used, and now Sidecar is doing that, and the toy store is doing that too. So we're trying to gather all the businesses on that street to start letting people in the front and the back and use Water Street as a place to gather. So the other thing I wanted to add though is, you know, what I see as a business owner is about 50% of the people who come in are local, and about 50% are from out of town. We're getting a lot of people coming from driving distance. So I think that's something we haven't talked about is, you know, even if we make it, you know, when we talk about people biking and all these things are really great, and I'm totally for that, but there are a lot of people, we do need that economy coming in from the driving from out of town, and so I just want to also mention that.
Yeah, I mean, it is not lost. I mean, it's absolutely a key core consideration, this balance of, you know, how businesses can be successful. And so this is the year that council is very clear, on top of all the, you know, council goals and priorities, you know, our focus is on economic development, right? How do we, we're sort of, I think we were really fortunate. This has been a longer than typical for a lot of different reasons cycle in the market, and again, it's, you know, as we start to see some of the uses, like the sort of traditional retail, I mean, there's a lot more opportunity throughout town, really, to try and reimagine and try to make it more attractive without doing the full-scale redevelopment, right? There has to be a balance of catalyst projects that will take large capital and redevelopment, but there's also making sure we're taking care of our current property owners, our current businesses, and making sure that they're places that are attractive and still economically viable. And so, you know, we work closely with our local brokers, property owners. We, you know, have that open dialogue, and really when I think about trying to solve the parking question, I think as locals we know, yeah, maybe don't drive on the boulevard after hours, you know, after you know, 5 o'clock. You may get super lucky to find a parking spot. Most of the time you're going to be doing this. You're doing the circle. So how do we make it easier? How do we make it, you know, whether it's through signage, having more attractive spaces, because it really just takes a couple more blocks and you can find the parking, and there's the willingness. And I think there needs to be a balance. Every time I'm you know, at Kentucky, on Kentucky, it's the like the DoorDash, sort of the quick drop-off, loading docks, loading zones. I think we need a little bit more of that, and I think those need to be strategically placed for that type of business to happen. And so I think that's where the parking study is going to be really important. So let's say, you know, just throwing a number out there, 500 spaces throughout town, 2 hours, you know, typically across the board, but how do we have a little bit more variation, curbside management, so that there's a little bit more, you know, little drop 10-minute, you know, to do the pickup and drop-offs, loading, handicap accessibility. That's another thing that we're going to have to incorporate into the process, and all that's going to make it easier for not just locals but for out of town. Dwayne?
Yes, I enjoy the restaurants outside. Kind of like pictures of Europe, France, Barcelona. I enjoy that. I enjoy the image. I was at the riverfront for the Caucus and Hen House last Friday. And my question is, in our society, how many people do we have that want to be eating outside any one weekend or any one night? And the people who are running those places along the riverfront, they've got to have enough customers to generate their staff, they have money for their restaurant. If we're giving parking places for free, or if we could do it as a price that's costs less than Riverfront is paying, we in effect diminish their profitability. And is there any effort to look and see whether there's waiting lists at the current outside eating places? If it's hard to get into them, then we would open up spaces for people who can't make reservations. But as long as there's spaces in the current outdoor eating places, why would we want to give away public property for restaurants to compete with the people who have put their lives into building a restaurant?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dwayne. So I don't know if it's necessarily fair to do the comparison that it's just a parking space versus, just repurposing it as outdoor dining. I think again that was the sole purpose, right? That was the primary purpose of the free range 1.0 during the pandemic, was to save our businesses and have that option. And not just businesses, but people were getting stir crazy too, right? People wanted to be outside, and I think we had a lot of pizza joints in town, oddly so. But I still remember like New York pizza, those early pandemic days where you couldn't go into the restaurant. They had the table and you just walk up and that was it. And so we're out of that phase, and now what it is, the discussion around Parklets is about more than just outdoor dining. We've always had sidewalk dining as a program, and so that's sort of the bistro table you have in front of tea room, and it's sort of a smaller footprint. But to me, like all of that should be wrapped into a free range program, and so there was that discussion with council on, should one business be able to, have a sidewalk dining permit and a parklet permit? Is that fair? And I think it's a case-by-case basis. And so just to answer your question about are we seeing data, or are we seeing the need, I think that need is going to present itself once we open up the program to see who may be interested in applying for the free range parklet permits.
So one of the things I heard you say was spaces that weren't necessarily commerce driven, or kind of third space, another activation. Any idea what that looks like? Any idea what the funding for that is? Who owns, for a lack of a better word, that space? And what kind of goals might council, I assume this is the kind of thing where you take a bunch of options to council and council kind of sets a policy forward. What kind of goals for that would you be seeing?
Yeah, great question. So it's where council landed in at least the workshop discussion was around needing both, right? So yes, we understand that in order for this to be successful, there's going to be some private entity, whether it's a property business owner, restaurant, I think it could evolve. It could be much more than that, and it's going to have to be a partnership. But I think there needs to be that willing partner, and I think about the one at Stockholm that we have. That's probably the most sort of public-private space that we have, and I think they did a really wonderful job, creating a place that it almost makes you question, is it public, is it private, can I sit here when I'm walking by? And so signage came up as just wanting to make sure that it's really clear, like this is not just for dining, right? This is there's sort of ground rules on how to use it, and you see that across the country really, and that's a successful model. So it just doesn't feel so much like this is just private space, this is just outdoor dining. It's a combination, right? And so we're going to have to work that out through the program development. But I think that's what's going to make for a successful project or program is to be able to have some clear ground rules on how people can use the space, and it should very much be a public and a private ownership and use. It is getting dark.
Yes.
So one of the questions I had at the last meeting too is with talk of sunsetting the program, was there any talk of ending it or before so we get the parking for the holidays for retail, or at least some of them that are taken underutilized
Yes.
this season?
Yeah. So.
Repeat the question, we can't hear you.
Oh.
Do you want my turn? I had asked when I went to the last meeting if they decided to sunset the program. As a retail owner, we want some of the parking back for the holiday season, which keeps us in business, right? And so I was asking if there was any discussion on ending the parklet programs or removing some of the ones that are underutilized that are taking up parking before the holidays.
Yeah, some of that is already ongoing. So you know, in front of or along Water Street, you know, there was a larger one closer to Washington that was removed, and so at this point we're not adding any, and so it's just taking sort of a one individual application or existing application approach to it. There was a discussion around, you know, what's an appropriate amount of time to bring existing parklets into compliance or just with the new rules, and the council seemed to have some agreement on a 6 month, right? And so that's something where which would line up with, you know, sort of the holiday season. But again, this is where, you know, I'd like to have that open dialogue on offline, of course, but just, you know, how it's impacting our businesses now, and what we can do, you know, and approach each one by one. Councilman, and then Dave.
I had one bad experience with this type of situation. I went down to the corners, which is down, I think Highway 12, heading down to the wineries down there. And so we got there, and this large gardens to go view. We had a group that went down. And so there's maybe 8 to 10 of us to go actually get a tour of the corners gardens. So we got there, and they do have a open area. We get some food or wine, whatever, and there's some seating around there. And we were hoping that in the parking area there would be a picnic bench or something that we could actually sit around and double up and be there. There wasn't. There was pretty rickety benches or whatever, chairs, but not a place for a group to come visit before they went on a tour. So we ended up going to the restaurant area, which had open tables on the outside. So we sat down, and before we left, the owner came out and gave us a big hassle about, please do not eat here again. Basically, because we brought our own food. We had our own picnic stuff, even though we bought 1 or 2 things. We had our own picnic, and so they were fairly polite about it, but very stern at the same time. So it was like, all right, do I really want to come back here? So if the desire, especially if we have a group that's on tour or coming in as a group, where could they sit and do things if they brought a picnic with them? We don't have a space anywhere like that pretty much right now. There's a couple of parks we can go to where that could happen, but not in the downtown area. So, but sitting down in what was claimed to be a restaurant, specified tables, and we're eating our own food, and having that event is, okay, we want to avoid that. If it's on our streets in our downtown area, we don't want to have the owners coming out and says, oh, please leave, I've got customers coming, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a real challenge that we'll want to address with any successful program, is to set clear guidance. And so if there truly is going to be, if we as a city want to see a program, a set of parklets that you know, balance public and private use, community use, and you know, you're able to bring your dog or bring a picnic and truly feel welcomed. And that's what the, you know, making sure that there's clear ground rules and expectations on whoever decides to potentially pull a permit, they have that awareness going in, because it won't be inexpensive, it's not expensive, but the idea is there's going to be a little bit of a cost borne by the applicant and a level of responsibility that they will hold to make sure that these are going to continue to be inviting places. There's activation. I think that's another thing that just popped in my head on what makes it successful. It's one thing to just build it and then maybe put a couple chairs down during restaurant hours and then closing it up. I mean, that's not my definition of an active place, a welcoming place. And so all of that, again, it's going to come down to setting the rules. I also think I've experienced this at some of the Sonoma wineries. I think part of it is their economics rely on the visitor serving and then the food space. So I wonder if that was maybe something at play there. I've seen a nice little sign, soul food outdoors, if you ever, if you enjoy Puerto Rican food, they have the same approach. There's a little sign that says, all are welcome to use the space, but please be respectful of our patrons that may want to use it. And so they I thought that struck a nice balance of saying it's okay, this is meant to be sort of public space, but then also there's that balance of public versus private. Dave?
I'm back here fielding questions from people who wonder what I'm doing. And some people want to ask questions. So Patricia Webb has two comments. She wants to see downtown bike racks. Perhaps she hasn't been downtown recently, that's a lot of town on that front. And then she asked that we ban propane heaters from Parklets, presumably for the climate action reason. Comments?
Great. So yeah, you'll see, just like in the last month, there's a whole program to get more bike racks downtown. This is a theme that keeps coming up in any discussion is if we want to, it's sort of, we have to walk the walk, right? We can talk about climate neutrality, carbon neutrality, we can talk about the, trying to encourage people to take public transportation and bike, but without the safety of bike racks or bike lockers, it's just not going to work. That's the missing puzzle. And so there is a big effort program led by our Public Works Department. The one that's coming to mind in front of the Mi Pueblo Parklet that was recently installed by Public Works, as have a few others throughout town. Second question was about propane heaters. So again, I think we're going to be talking about the city's climate action plan before the end of the year. It's expected to come to council. It's going to take a multifaceted approach to meet our climate goals, and the sort of use or the de-use of natural gas into clean energy is absolutely going to be part of that equation. And so I think that's just a consideration that we'll have to take as part of the program, and something that ultimately we'll have to balance with what we have as existing city rules, and then what council may want to incorporate into that program. But that's something we need to absolutely keep in mind.
I haven't been here long enough and I don't eat fast food, but do you have any restrictions on fast food places where people drive in? We had a terrible problem in Colorado Springs. Dutch Brothers Coffee was the worst, where people would line up and actually block the sidewalks. So our transportation people were trying to get no more of these in town. Are there a lot in Petaluma?
So we do have a ban on no new drive-throughs, and so everything you see is
I would write a poem about that. When did that come into play?
2 years ago. Oh gosh, yeah, 27 years.
Wow. Yeah. And aren't you the first in the nation with no new gas stations? Yes. I thought that was really exciting. Wow. Well, that's pretty impressive.
mentioned open streets and the opportunities with Ciclovia to close down the boulevard, and what I'm hearing from, you know, our vice mayor here, we need more opportunities for third spaces, for public gathering, for our locals, for our tourists, and we really are in a deficit of that. I hear that this parklet design is really meant to bridge more opportunities for public access to our public domain that's currently being occupied by private business owners. I'm curious, is there any discussion around festival streets or opportunities where we close down the streets, take over for maybe once a month or even ambitiously once a week, where we're building more of a robust culture that brings people into the downtown district to support this revitalization effort in a way that also builds culture. Because I'm thinking of that first question you asked, what do I do when I go down to downtown? And the first thing that came to mind was, oh God, there goes $200. You can't do anything downtown without spending a ton of money, and how wonderful it would be to be able to embrace being in these third spaces in community without having any sort of financial ties. Might liberate us to actually go into a store and spend some more money in that capacity. So I'm just curious, are there discussions about festival streets coming down the pipeline, doing more of this open street thought?
Yeah, great question. So I think the last one may have been 2022 when we had the Ciclovia open street concept. That's where, you know, right now we're discussing parklets, but when I think about free range just as a concept, it's all of that, right? And it's not just for downtown. I mean, we think about, I live over by McDowell Elementary, off of McDowell and Washington area. Lots of young families in the neighborhood, lots of backyard barbecues. But the one thing that always comes up when we, you know, undoubtedly someone asks me about something about, you know, city government, it's about like this whole block party concept. How do we create these programs or these opportunities for community to happen? And it's not just parklets, it's not just an open street. Could we get to a place where we do like an open street once a month? Absolutely. I think it's going to take some thought leaders, some strong partners. That was the other program I oversaw in Los Angeles, was the Ciclovia program, and what they did was they took this concept of closing huge streets. We're talking Wilshire Boulevard, Vermont, Venice Boulevard, for, you know, the better part of a Sunday, and we would do quarterly, and we'd go from place to place to make sure it's equitable, and we're you know, having these opportunities for all Angelinos. And could we do something like that here? I absolutely think so. I mean, it's sort of a blue zones concept too, is you know, how are we moving naturally? I would, if you have it, I mean, I guess we typically do this when we're crossing a street in a crosswalk, hopefully, not jaywalking. But there is this, like, and maybe it's just me, but I do get this sort of visceral, there's this like physiological reaction that one feels when your feet are planted in the roadway where you almost like shouldn't be there. I don't know if other people feel that, but I encourage you to do it safely, but just try it. Just step out and just see how that feels, because it is a different experience.
I'm heartened by those comments. Thank you for sharing that. And if I could make a plug for anything on the east side, I would also acknowledge that we have very few third places accessible on the east side. And this idea has been circulated in lots of discussions we've received from the community saying, why couldn't we do pop-ups in, say, the Kmart parking lot that's completely vacant and underutilized? Why couldn't we turn that into something like where Santa Rosa has Mitote, and they have the pop-up food trucks, and we're building community with very little infrastructure changes needed for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the term they use is tactical urbanism, right? So how do we make it, or guerrilla urbanism, and there's a few different variations, but you know, how do we do these sort of lighter, sort of quick, I don't like the word quick build, but sort of lighter touch things that allow people to think a little bit bigger and experience it differently without the big capital, project that can take years and lots of money. But yeah, we're already starting to see a little bit of activation there too with Kmart redevelopment, and so there's again this move away from large retail spaces. It's just a really difficult space to be in, and so the property owner there is currently going through a process of splitting that into 3 subtenants. But that's a long time coming. I mean, you talk to anybody in any of those businesses there, and they absolutely feel it, feel the lack of presence there. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if that will work here, but what about, the city has thought about maybe some kind of a pop-up, but nightly, like during the day allow certain area to be regular traffic, so all the businesses have, all the people coming in, shopping, buying, printing, whatever, and then maybe 4 o'clock or something like that, streets are closed, and then they turn into, a night festival night. That's what they do in Mazatlan, and I remember the first time I saw it, I arrived in old part of the town, and there was this wonderful, amazing, fair, in the middle of the night. Went back to my hotel, came back the next day in the morning, and I couldn't find it. I was walking around and saying, where is it? What happened? It was only 2 blocks out of around. I walked all over the place and nothing. So, waited for the night, come back again, and magic. There's again, what happened? And so, when I asked them, and they told me this is what we do, I had to go there at the time, and it was just amazing to see the police will come over. They have a place where they will put these cylinders, so no more cars will go. They had signs saying, you can only park at a certain time. And then all the waiters were coming out, and they were sweeping the floor, they were putting water in the pavement, they were putting all these decorations, and voila, there was. And everybody would come over, locals, tourists, etc. And then at night, clean up, and next day, you had the traffic again that you needed for deliveries, for commerce, etc. I mean, I don't know if that will work here, but I'm just.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can, and I can see it. I mean, we have the social capital, we have the right mix of people here in town, where you have a restaurant that does bagels during the day and does pop-up dinners at night. You have on the other end of downtown, you have a restaurant that on any other given night, it's that third place that we're all seeking, right? That community space. And so we have those strong leaders within the community that we just need to sort of pull out and just help rally all these great ideas that are coming.
One thing that really struck to me during this transformation is that all the businesses that were there, especially the ones that sold trinkets and art and stuff like that, they will close their sites, but then they will move into the middle and have some kind of like a fair, and then they extended the hours. They used to be 9 to 5, and on those nights they were 9 until 9 or whatever. And they were selling because people were coming to these things. They were hungry for it. There were musicians, there were lights, there were different ingredients that make people come and want to support.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity, I've gone down to the block a few times now, because at the end of the bike rides, Sunday we end up at the block. And then, this is the one time, and my son just was there, and he was doing open mic night for music. So I knew he was still going down there, but I actually got to hear him. But what impressed me about its success is that the age of the crowd. Much younger folks who go to other restaurants, like you go to BCBC or anything else, and it's going to be our age group. Whereas you go to the block, and it's 20 years younger, even 30 years younger. So I'm seeing a whole different crowd, a popular outdoor spot that's more family. You see lots of kids there now with families. And because they provide the music, they have a little food, they have a little alcohol, but it's mixed. And even have pop-up foods come in with a couple tents there, just tacos was this last week. It was serving up tacos under a tent. So they kind of invite these things. So that is, I think that's the type of activity and space that's new and different for us here in Petaluma, but it's showing to be very positive and profitable, looks like. So I'd like to see more of that. If we could generate that type of atmosphere in other places, downtown and on the east side, would be nice. But as you said, in front of Kmart would be a nice place to do something like that, or a couple other places.
Is it difficult to get a street closed for a neighborhood event? We have a lot of porch fests in our historic neighborhoods, and we could close, 2 blocks, and then often have food trucks come and performers play on the porches. They go from.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to
Is that
think that
easy?
we make it easy, but I think it's, we have a process, and if you are having challenges with it, please reach out and I'm happy to help.
There was a small city that we were visiting once, and they had a special annual festival there. Basically, you just walk around town, and basically all the musicians would play music on their porch. And we just walk around, and they had various locations, but it was pretty much most in their downtown area. You'd walk down almost any street, and you'd be hearing music coming out of a porch. And it was like a music festival, it was a beautiful thing. And some folks, full bands were set. Since we have a lot of musicians here, but having that type of atmosphere where it's more of an open, walk the streets, come out and be there. That seems like something we could import here.
That's really popular in our older neighborhoods in Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
So on the other hand,
I wondered about what you were saying about the river. It keeps coming up in every single project that I have the opportunity to watch. But is there a plan, and it's stated that there's this plan to acquire the land all along the Petaluma River and one day be able to create a roadway or a walkway? And I wondered, what department is that under? Where is that plan? And is there a map that shows how much is acquired?
yeah, and I remember you from, I think, one of the other, that's right. And what was your name?
Rachel.
Rachel, good to see you. So I think there's a combination. So one piece is anytime there's, so this is the, oh gosh, I'm gonna mess up the date, 1991, it's a 90s plan. The River Access and Enhancement Plan, so it's a citywide document.
Okay.
And so that, one of the sole functions of it was, how do we make the river more accessible to the community? And so as property along the river redevelops, and this is private property, there's a requirement that they add to that leg, right? So you'll see over down Boulevard South, the McNear Circle development, the Eden Housing, the senior apartments right next to it. So as those redeveloped, there's a really nice publicly accessible pathway. And so as those parcels redevelop, that's a requirement as part of the redevelopment. And then that's how we're going to fully realize a true, access, river access along the path. So that's the west side of the river. Much of that is also the case on the east side of the river, but there are stretches that are city-owned. So just off of D, along the landing there, just as you're coming into downtown. So there are places where they're city-owned parks essentially, but that's usually the triggers as things redevelop. Those are opportunities for us to provide more of that public space to the community.
Are they required, the owners of those properties seeking redevelopment, are they required to grant an easement, or are they deeding it over a certain amount of setback to the city?
Yeah, great question. So there's
What is
usually
required?
an easement, as it's, it's considered the property of that development, and then
They retain
there's a
ownership,
public easement, correct.
which means they're responsible for upkeep of the sidewalks.
Yeah, I would encourage you, there's some variations, like when Bay Street, the street went into the redevelopment along mean, the access isn't all the same, not all access has been created equally. I think the true one is, the one I'm most familiar with is some of the newer development, like near Circle, over just down the street here. And then as you're starting to see that redevelop. And then the other, I mean, the prime example, you know, with the redevelopment of the stretch of waterfront or Water Street, with Brewster's, with the La Villa, the Spanos apartments, the new apartments just outside of downtown.
Yeah,
That whole, I mean, if you look at the street
yeah.
satellite images of that, I mean, it's night and day what it is, right? And it's created that clear path right
Yeah.
down Lynch Creek, with our true
Yeah.
crosstown connector.
Yeah,
And that's really one of the
and
things
that
like
little
that.
bridge.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's-
Yep.
So, but they own that way along the river there. They didn't deed it to the city.
I mean, there's
Like the,
probably a combination of that. I mean, again, at the end of the day, it's, you know, it's public space that we're
Yeah.
using. And then you got a question about who's responsible for that. I mean, I think it's a combination of public works and
I think,
community development.
okay, the plan, I just meant the plan
Yeah,
is
Yeah.
it's a joint, okay.
yes.
I'll just add, there's usually a buffer from the river and then additional park space as part of the easement. So we're not just getting floodway, we're getting usable space that's back up off the waterway as well.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time seeing hands.
In the back
Wave your
of
phone.
Where's your phone?
I do, yeah, okay. I think the question a minute ago, if I heard it correctly, was really sort of about block parties. And I have actually advocated for years for block parties, and the irony is the city municipal code actually bans block parties except on cul-de-sacs. If you call the police to get a permit, they won't give you a permit because they know it's being against municipal code, but they sort of give you a wink and a nod, saying, just go ahead and do it, don't tell us, don't be stupid. It would be an easy fix to the municipal code. I've been pushing for 10 years. It never gets very high on the priority list, but I'll just put my plug in again. Let's make the code clean on that point so the police can be more helpful.
Mr. Vice Mayor, okay.
But to your point, Dave, I mean, I do think people find their ways. I mean, I'm with you on the same page.
One of my favorite stories is when a neighborhood where the police chief lived wanted to do a block party. He left town for the weekend because he didn't really participate, but he didn't want to stop it. And that's dumb.
Right, there's one property that I got to visit, it's right on the freeway in Washington and in the neighborhood. And it's owned by Caltrans still, but the neighborhood wants to turn that into a parklet, a mini park for themselves, to do a little gardening, do a little this, and want to work through it. What would be the process if the neighborhood wants to do something on that site and try to work with it? What would be the process, how difficult it would be to do that conversion? Should they just do it guerrilla style? I have a friend, we've actually done a roundabout, actually worked with them, and actually we take care of a roundabout that way. Just guerrilla gardening, and just doing things. Would Caltrans care enough, or would we do any enforcement? Or what would be the process to take action and do something? How would we go about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all of the above. I do think Caltrans would probably have, an interest in it, and so if we truly were to engage, and I'm not sure exactly which, property you're talking about, but I think anytime we work across and work with our other jurisdictions, whether it's the state or the regional authority, other government entities, it may add a little bit more complexity just to understand all the different rules. So without really responding much more to that, I think it's if there's a community interest and it's state owned, I think there's one path to work with our state representatives and Caltrans, and then I think there's other things that might happen on the ground without that level of intervention.
The spot is gonna be near a bike path that goes across the freeway, the pedestrian path. Just down the street there, it's in the southeast corner of the freeway in Washington. So there's a leftover land that's not being used for anything right now, just a vacant lot. So anyway, that's a piece of property. Great opportunity to do something.
Yeah.
Let the neighbors just go.
Yeah. You said it, no?
Yeah.
I can jump in one more time then?
Sure.
I was thrilled with your conversation or your comments regarding curb management. That's a phrase we just haven't heard enough in this town. The other two thoughts on curb management. One thing you didn't mention is with the city rolling out a micro-transit program, having a spot in the curb where you can direct people to come to, where you let all your passengers out, would make that run a lot smoother. And it's possible Transit's already having that conversation with you. And then also, I didn't hear parking meters listed among your curb management approaches, but nationwide, that is absolutely how we get good curb management, how we make sure parking is always available as parking meters. It is in the draft framework for the general plan, so hopefully we'll actually make the general plan. I just want to put a plug in for parking meters.
Yeah, I mean, I think it, again, it's going to take a very intentional discussion, just to understand impacts, perceived impacts, real impacts. And I think the biggest question is just if we were to make any sort of change, which at this point, there isn't any discussion about that. I do think there's a lot of good practice, a lot of good data out there that supports, actually putting a price on a commodity like a parking space. But I think the biggest question is going to be, how does that revenue get reinvested into our downtown, into our merchants, into our property? I mean, I think that's what you've got to lead with. Again, it's something that I suspect will come up as part of the parking study, some of the comments we're receiving, all the above.
Reinvestment downtown is absolutely key, and every example out there is don't just put the money in the state treasury, put it back into the neighborhood being impacted by meters. And if I can throw one other pitch out here, probably the leading national nonprofit arguing for parking reform, meaning eliminated minimums, maybe even caps on maximums, parking meters, curb management, etc., is a group called the Parking Reform Network out of Portland. The executive director of them spoke to us about a year ago in this, I would say in this space, but we forgot to reserve it that night, so we did it at the steps out front. But it actually worked out well. They are doing a one-day conference in San Francisco in 2 months on this whole question. A lot of us from Urban Chat are already planning on going. Anybody else who wants to talk to me, let's make it a Petaluma thing.
Let me just say, I've only lived here a little bit, but I love the free parking, and I just love to be driving. The only time I go downtown is I go on night and day trips to see how much the parking curb is utilized at what time, and I study the overflow into the neighborhoods, and it's in all the tourist magazines and the different, all the different, you get to know about the free parking, and you can park here for free and go visit our businesses. I love the parking structures that they're free.
Yeah, well, that's
So
just
thank
it,
you.
right? It's not just free parking, it's how do we make it easy, right?
I
Whether
know.
it's free or whatever it is.
Push them into the lots and.
Yeah, or just
make
have
it
the
more
awareness.
livable.
Signage would help. There's no
Yeah,
signage
there's a
downtown.
whole, if you think about, some of like Redwood City, right? They have a really strong parking signage program, so you just know before you enter the, 4-story parking structure that there's 100 spaces on the 3rd level.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna go with it. I'm gonna commit to that.
Yeah. it's great
Otherwise,
to
you're
have
left
it.
with, I don't think this is worth my time to do that.
Yeah,
piece right
and
now."
the apps are incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
they save,
Yep.
yeah.
All right, well, Dave, I'm starting to see less and less. Turn it back to you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.